He called me legacy clutter during an all-hands meeting. I called the Department of Energy and revoked access to a 61 Mobides green tech subsidy he'd never have known existed without me. They thought I was the past, but I'd written the future into every compliance line they never bothered to read. My name is Rachel Voss. At 41, I've spent the last decade of my life building the compliance management system at Ikarenova, one of Denver's fastest-growing renewable energy corporations. We specialize in energy storage technology and urban green solutions, or at least that's what our sleek brochures say. What they don't mention is that behind every innovative solar panel and battery storage unit is a labyrinth of federal regulations, subsidies, and compliance requirements that someone has to navigate. That someone was me. For 10 years, I'd been the invisible scaffolding holding up Ekarenova's success. I secured $137 million in federal grants. I built relationships with Department of Energy officials who trusted my meticulous documentation. I created fail-safe systems that ensured we maintained our green certified status that opened doors to lucrative government contracts. But in the brave new world of accelerate and automate, my kind of work had become unfashionable. Careful review of regulatory standards doesn't make for exciting PowerPoint slides. Relationship management with federal agencies doesn't translate into viral LinkedIn posts. In the eyes of our growth-obsessed executive team, I had become, as I would soon hear publicly, legacy clutter. The problem started when Gregory Ames, our CEO, brought in Jared Langston as our new chief financial officer. Jared was 33, fresh from a stint at a venture capital firm in San Francisco, with slicked-back hair and custom suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. From day one, he made it clear that his mandate was to streamline outdated structures and maximize profit margins through operational efficiency. Corporate speak for cutting what he deemed unnecessary. I first noticed his disdain during a quarterly review meeting. While I presented our compliance status report highlighting how we'd secured a new $61 million green technology subsidy, he scrolled through his phone, occasionally glancing up with thinly veiled impatience. "Thank you, Rachel," he interrupted, 3 slides before my conclusion. "I think we get the gist. Moving on to revenue projections." After the meeting, I approached him. "Jared, I noticed you seemed distracted during my presentation. The new subsidy I mentioned will directly impact your financial forecasts. It's significant." He barely looked up from his tablet. "Thanks, but we're pivoting toward a more aggressive investment strategy that doesn't rely so heavily on government handouts. My team is already factoring in alternatives." "They're not handouts," I corrected, feeling heat rise to my face. "They're strategic incentives designed to reward companies developing renewable technology. We've built our entire business model around them." "That's exactly the problem," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "Too much dependence on slow bureaucratic processes. We need to move faster." He glanced at his watch. "I have another call. We'll continue this conversation at the Reorg Showcase on Monday." Reorg Showcase? The words sent a chill down my spine. I'd been at Ekarenova long enough to know what that meant. Over the weekend, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through mental scenarios of what Monday might bring. By Sunday night, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. Surely they wouldn't dismantle the compliance department I'd built from nothing. The risk would be too great. Monday morning arrived with deceptive brightness. Colorado sunshine streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our LEED-certified headquarters. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a charcoal gray suit with a subtle pinstripe. My power armor. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. in the main conference room. Pretentiously named Horizon, I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit, and took a seat in the second row. Around me, colleagues filtered in, some casting curious glances my way. Did they know something I didn't? At exactly 9:30, Gregory and Jared entered, followed by Melissa from HR. That's when my stomach truly sank. HR's presence at a reorg presentation was never a good sign. Gregory spoke first, all enthusiasm and vague business jargon. "Team, today marks an exciting new chapter for Ekarenova. As we scale toward our ambitious growth targets, we need to ensure our organizational structure reflects our forward momentum. I'll let Jared walk us through the details of our new streamlined approach. Jared took center stage, clicking through slides of org charts and efficiency metrics. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, waiting for the blow I knew was coming. As we transition to a more agile operational model, Jared announced, we need to identify areas where historical processes have created legacy clutter that slows our ability to execute quickly. There it was, legacy clutter. I felt dozens of eyes shift toward me. Our compliance functions, while necessary, have grown disproportionately complex. He continued, displaying a slide with my department highlighted in red. We'll be consolidating these functions under finance and reimagining certain roles to better align with our future direction. He clicked to the next slide, which showed the new organization chart. My name was there, but instead of Director of Compliance Management, my title now read Warehouse Records Administrator. The room went silent. I could feel my pulse in my temples as Jared continued. Rachel will transition to managing our warehouse maintenance records, leveraging her attention to detail in a more streamlined capacity. This change is effective immediately. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others avoided eye contact entirely. One of the younger engineers in the back actually snickered. I remained expressionless. Years of negotiating with federal officials having taught me how to keep my composure when ambushed. But inside, something hardened. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but a cold, calculated certainty about what needed to happen next. After the meeting, colleagues approached with awkward condolences masked as congratulations on my new role. I accepted them with a tight smile, already mentally inventorying every document, certificate, and authorization that bore my signature. Jared caught up with me as I headed back to my office soon to be former office. Rachel, I wanted to check in. I know transitions can be challenging, but I believe this restructuring will ultimately benefit everyone, including you. Less stress, more manageable responsibilities. I looked at him, this man who had just publicly stripped away a decade of my professional identity and spoken about it as if he'd done me a favor. It's fine, Jared, I said, my voice steady. I understand how these things work. I'll need some time to organize my files for handover. Great attitude, he said, clearly relieved I wasn't making a scene. Take the rest of the day. HR will reach out about transitioning your workspace tomorrow. I nodded and watched him walk away, already mentally calculating the cascading effects of what I was about to set in motion. Back in my office, I closed the door and pulled up my employment contract on my computer. I'd negotiated it carefully years ago, with language that most people in the company probably never bothered to read. Section 5B specifically addressed what happened to my legal authorizations if my position changed. Any federal, state, or local authorizations, certifications, or legal representations made in the capacity of Director of Compliance Management shall be considered void within 48 hours of any material change in job title or responsibilities, requiring immediate notification to relevant agencies. I'd included this clause to protect myself from being held legally responsible for compliance issues if I ever left the position. Now, it would serve a different purpose. Over the next few hours, I meticulously gathered and organized every document related to our government subsidies, grants, and compliance certifications. I printed copies of everything, backed up digital files to a personal drive, and made note of every deadline, inspection date, and renewal requirement for the next 6 months. Most importantly, I documented every instance where my personal credentials, which I'd spent years earning through specialized training and certification, were listed as the responsible party for compliance oversight. This included the $61 million green technology subsidy that Jared had dismissed so casually. By 7 p.m., I was the only one left in the office. I methodically removed personal items from my desk, leaving behind only company property. In my personal notebook, I wrote a detailed timeline of the day's events, including verbatim quotes from the meeting. Colorado was a one-party consent state for recordings, and the audio from the all-hands meeting was already safely stored in my personal email. As I prepared to leave, I took one last look at the wall of certificates behind my desk, each one representing months of work, relationships built, and knowledge that couldn't be transferred with a simple handover memo. Tomorrow, they would belong to the past, but tonight, they were still valid legal documents with my name on them. The next morning, I arrived early, dressed as professionally as the day before. Melissa from HR was waiting by my office door. Rachel, good morning. I've set up a temporary workspace for you near the warehouse facilities on the lower level. I'll help you transition your essentials today. Thank you, Melissa, I said, unlocking my office door. I've already packed my personal items. I just need to finalize a few documents before I hand things over. She nodded uncomfortably. About that, Jared mentioned you should simply transfer all files to the shared drive. Lauren from Finance will be taking over your compliance oversight duties. Lauren, 26 years old with a finance degree and no compliance experience. Of course. I understand, I said calmly. But there are federal requirements about how transfers of authorized representation must occur. I need to formally notify several agencies of the change. Melissa hesitated. I should probably check with Jared about that. By all means, I said. I'm just following federal protocols. Section 1603 of the Energy Policy Act specifically requires notification by the previously authorized representative. I'm trying to protect the company. Dropping a specific regulation number always worked with people who didn't actually know the regulations. Melissa nodded, clearly not wanting to appear uninformed. All right, but please try to wrap it up today. Your new workspace is ready whenever you are. After she left, I spent the morning sending carefully worded emails to my contacts at various federal agencies, informing them that due to organizational changes, I would no longer be serving as Ecorinova's compliance representative. I cited the relevant section of my employment contract and requested confirmation of receipt. For the $61 million subsidy program, Jared's future bonus generator that he didn't even know existed yet, I made a phone call rather than sending an email. Department of Energy, Renewable Energy Division. This is Thomas. Thomas, it's Rachel Voss from Ecorinova. Rachel, good to hear from you. How's everything in Denver? Actually, there's been a change I need to inform you about. I've been reassigned from my compliance role, effective yesterday. A pause on the line. That's surprising. Who's taking over? We'll need to update our authorization records immediately. That's why I'm calling. As per Section 5B of my employment agreement and Section 1603 of the policy requirements, I'm formally notifying you that all authorizations under my name should be suspended pending new qualified personnel assignment. I see, Thomas said slowly. This affects several major programs, including the new storage technology subsidy. Without an authorized compliance officer, we'll have to place those funds on administrative hold. I understand. I'm just following protocol. Of course, I'll process this immediately. Rachel. Off the record, is everything okay there? Just organizational changes, Thomas. Business decisions. Well, we've always appreciated your thoroughness. Your replacement will have big shoes to fill. After hanging up, I felt a twinge of guilt not for Ecorinova or Jared, but for the projects that might be delayed. I genuinely believed in renewable energy and had chosen this career to make a difference. But companies needed to understand that compliance wasn't just bureaucratic busywork, it was the foundation everything else was built upon. I spent the rest of the day moving to my new office, a repurposed storage closet near the warehouse with a desk that wobbled and fluorescent lighting that hummed. I organized the few items I'd brought and began reviewing the warehouse maintenance records I was now responsible for. They were, unsurprisingly, a mess. No one had properly filed anything for years. For the next 3 days, I performed my new role meticulously, organizing decades of neglected records while waiting for the other shoe to drop. I spoke only when spoken to, ate lunch alone, and left precisely at 5 p.m. each day. On Thursday afternoon, my phone pinged with a notification from my personal compliance monitoring system, a small program I'd created that tracked the status of our federal certifications. One by one, they were being flagged as pending review, or authorization suspended. By Friday morning, the effects would start to become visible. I kept my head down and continued alphabetizing maintenance invoices. The chaos began precisely as I'd calculated. At 9:17 a.m. on Friday, Lauren from finance burst into my closet office without knocking. "Rachel, do you know why I just got an email saying our application for the Thompson County Solar Array project was rejected? They're saying we don't have proper compliance certification." I looked up calmly from my filing. "That sounds like a compliance issue. You should probably check with whoever's handling that now." Her face flushed. "I'm handling it. Jared assigned it to me on Tuesday. But the system won't let me access the certification portal, and the project deadline is today." "Did Jared transfer the authorization credentials to you?" "He tried, but the federal system is saying the request has to come from you as the previous authorized representative." I nodded thoughtfully. "That's standard protocol for security reasons. Unfortunately, as I'm no longer in that role, my authorization was automatically revoked after 48 hours. It's in my employment contract." Lauren stared at me, realization dawning. "So, no one can access the system. Someone would need to apply for new authorization credentials. The process usually takes about 3 to 4 weeks, assuming the applicant has the required certifications." 3 to 4 weeks. The Thompson project is worth $12 million. I shrugged sympathetically. Compliance can be complicated. That's why consistency and oversight is so important. As Lauren rushed out, presumably to panic at Jared, I returned to my filing. By lunchtime, similar crises were erupting across the company. The internal dashboard that monitored our compliance status was lighting up with error messages. Projects were being placed on hold. Partner companies were calling with concerns. At 2:13 p.m., my phone rang. It was Gregory Ames, our CEO. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message requesting no, demanding my immediate presence in the executive conference room. I took my time gathering my notes, then made my way upstairs. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see Gregory, Jared, Melissa from HR, and 2 people from legal huddled in intense conversation. When I entered, they all fell silent. Gregory spoke first. "Rachel, we seem to have a situation with our compliance authorizations." "So I've heard," I replied, taking a seat. "According to legal, all of our federal certifications are being suspended because there's no authorized representative on file. This is causing severe operational disruptions." I nodded. "That makes sense. Federal regulations require an authorized representative with proper credentials to maintain active status." Jared leaned forward, barely containing his anger. "Cut the act, Rachel. You knew this would happen when you were reassigned." "I followed all proper protocols," I said evenly. "As required by both my employment contract and federal regulations, I notified the relevant agencies of my change in position. What happens after that is standard procedure." One of the lawyers, Sandra, I believed, spoke up. "She's right. Section 5B of her contract explicitly states that authorizations become void within 48 hours of a position change, and the federal guidelines require immediate notification." Jared's face reddened. "Why didn't you tell me this would happen?" I met his gaze steadily. "You didn't ask. When you decided to reassign me without consultation, you made it clear my expertise wasn't valued. I simply complied with my legal obligations." Gregory rubbed his temples. "Can we fix this? The Thompson project deadline is today, and we have the EPA inspection on Monday." "Monday?" Jared looked alarmed. "What EPA inspection?" "The annual compliance review." I explained. "It's scheduled for the 3rd Monday of every month. It's been on the compliance calendar for the past 5 years." "I haven't seen any compliance calendar," Jared snapped. "It's in the compliance management system. Access requires proper authorization." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the situation sank in. Without passing the EPA inspection, we could lose certification for half our product line. Gregory finally spoke. "Rachel, what would it take to resolve this immediately?" "Legally, I would need to be reinstated to my previous position with all authorities intact." and we would need to file emergency restoration paperwork with each agency. Even then, some programs might require in-person verification before reactivation. And if we don't do that, asked the second lawyer, then someone else with proper credentials would need to apply for authorization. As I mentioned to Lauren, that typically takes 3 to 4 weeks. The inspection on Monday would likely result in operations suspension until proper compliance oversight is restored. Gregory turned to Jared. Fix this, now. Then to me. Rachel, please work with Jared to resolve this situation immediately. I folded my hands. I'm afraid I can't do that from my current position. Warehouse Records Administrator doesn't have the authority to access compliance systems. Gregory's expression hardened. Consider yourself temporarily reinstated to your previous role, effective immediately. I'll need that in writing, I said calmly. And I'll need system access restored. Sandra quickly drafted a memo while Melissa made calls to IT. Within an hour, I was back in my old office, access credentials restored. I spent the rest of the day submitting emergency reinstatement requests to various agencies, carefully explaining that my reassignment had been reconsidered due to operational requirements. Some agencies responded quickly. Others would require in-person verification the following week. The Thompson project deadline was extended by 72 hours as a courtesy, but we'd lost our preferred contractor status pending full recertification. As for the $61 million green technology subsidy, the one that would have funded expansion projects and executive bonuses, it remained on administrative hold, requiring a formal review before reinstatement. By 8 p.m., I'd done everything possible to mitigate the immediate damage. I gathered my things and headed home, stopping to buy a bottle of expensive wine on the way. Tonight, I would allow myself to celebrate this small victory, knowing that tomorrow would bring new battles. The weekend passed in a blur of emergency calls and remote troubleshooting. I worked diligently from home, documenting every step of the recovery process and every failure point that had led to the crisis. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about creating a record of what happens when companies treat compliance as an afterthought. Monday morning arrived with a sense of impending reckoning. The EPA inspectors were scheduled for 10 a.m., and despite my best efforts, several key authorizations remained in pending status. I arrived at the office at 7:30 to prepare, wearing my most authoritative suit and carrying a binder of documentation. Jared was already there, pacing nervously in the conference room where the inspection would take place. Is everything ready? He demanded when he saw me. As ready as it can be under the circumstances, I replied. I've prepared explanations for the gaps in our certification status, but they'll still need to note the deficiencies. That's not good enough. We need to pass this inspection. Compliance doesn't work that way. Jared, we can't just decide to pass. We either meet the requirements or we don't. He ran a hand through his usually perfect hair. Do you have any idea what this could cost us? The market reaction alone could tank our stock price. I do know. I've been managing this risk for 10 years, I said quietly. That's why I created redundant systems and fail-safes which were dismantled when you decided compliance was legacy clutter. Before he could respond, Gregory arrived, looking as though he hadn't slept. Where do we stand? I handed him the status report I'd prepared. We've restored about 60% of our critical authorizations. The remaining 40% are in process but won't be active before the inspection. I've highlighted the areas of highest concern in red. Gregory scanned the document, his expression growing darker with each page. This is worse than I thought. What's our strategy for the inspectors? Transparency, I said firmly. We acknowledge the disruption, explain the steps we're taking to rectify it, and commit to a timeline for full compliance restoration. Anything else would be counterproductive and potentially constitute misrepresentation. She's right, Sandra said, entering the room with the other lawyer. We need to be forthcoming about the situation. Attempting to conceal these issues would only compound our legal exposure. Jared looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find a counter-argument that wouldn't implicate himself in the mess he'd created. At precisely 10 a.m., the EPA inspection team arrived led by Michael Rodriguez, who had conducted our last 3 annual reviews. His expression when he saw me was one of professional neutrality overlaid with thinly veiled concern. "Ms. Voss," he said, shaking my hand. "I received some conflicting information about your status with Ekaranova. I'm glad to see you're still overseeing compliance." "There was a brief organizational adjustment," I explained carefully, "but I've been reinstated to ensure continuity in our compliance program." His eyes told me he understood exactly what had happened. He'd seen this movie before at other companies. The inspection proceeded methodically. I presented the documentation I'd prepared, explaining the current status of our authorizations and the remediation plan. Michael took meticulous notes, occasionally asking pointed questions that highlighted the severity of the situation. "So to clarify," he said during the summary discussion, "your emergency storage system certification is currently suspended, which means we cannot approve access to the prototype testing area today." "That's correct," I confirmed, avoiding looking at Gregory, whose prototype testing area was the crown jewel he showed to investors. "We've applied for expedited reinstatement, but it remains pending approval. And the supply chain verification for your battery components, also pending. We've submitted all required documentation for review." Michael nodded, making another note. "Based on my preliminary assessment, I'll have to recommend restricted operational status for Facilities 3, 4, and 7 until full compliance is restored. Facilities 1 and 2 can continue normal operations under enhanced monitoring." Gregory looked stricken. Facilities 3, 4, and 7 represented over 60% of our production capacity. "How long will the restrictions last?" Jared asked, his voice tight. "That depends on how quickly the authorization issues are resolved." Michael replied, "Given Ms. Voss's reinstatement, I would expect the process to move relatively quickly, assuming there are no further organizational disruptions." He gave Jared a pointed look. After the inspectors left, Gregory called an emergency executive meeting. The mood was funereal as Sandra outlined the implications of the restricted status. "Bottom line," she concluded, "we're looking at approximately $7 to $9 million in lost revenue over the next 2 weeks, assuming authorizations are restored quickly. The Thompson project is still viable, but at reduced profitability due to the contractor change. The green technology subsidy remains on hold pending full review." Gregory turned to me. "How quickly can you fix this?" "If I have full authority and cooperation, I can probably resolve the critical issues within 2 weeks. Complete restoration of all programs will take longer, especially the subsidy." "You have whatever you need," Gregory assured me before turning to Jared. "As for you, we'll discuss your role in this situation privately." The meeting adjourned with a sense of grim determination. As people filed out, Gregory asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, he sighed heavily. "Rachel, I owe you an apology. I should have consulted you before approving such a significant restructuring." I nodded, accepting, but not absolving. "Compliance isn't just paperwork, Gregory. It's the legal foundation that allows us to operate. Without it, we're just a building full of ideas and ambitions with no way to execute them legally." "I understand that now," he said, looking every day of his 57 years. "I need you to rebuild what was dismantled, whatever resources you require." "And Jared?" Gregory's expression hardened. "He'll be reassigned to a role more suited to his actual expertise. His bonus structure will also be adjusted to reflect the financial impact of his decisions." I allowed myself a small smile. "I'm glad to hear that. Accountability is important in a well-functioning organization." "Indeed it is." Gregory agreed, clearly including himself in that assessment. "I'll send out an announcement about your reinstatement this afternoon. Is there anything else you need immediately?" I thought for a moment. "Yes, I want Lauren from finance temporarily assigned to my team. She needs to understand compliance from the ground up if she's going to work with these programs." Gregory nodded. "Done." "And Rachel, thank you for not letting this become an even bigger disaster. You could have simply walked away." "That's not who I am," I said simply. "I believe in what we're trying to build here. I just need everyone else to understand what it takes to build it right." After Gregory left, I sat alone in the conference room, processing the events of the past week. I'd won this round, but at what cost? The trust and camaraderie I'd once felt at Ekaranova was damaged, perhaps irreparably. I'd been publicly humiliated, then publicly vindicated, neither experience particularly comfortable. As I gathered my notes, my phone pinged with an email notification. It was from Verdancy Group, Ikaranova's main competitor, responding to an application I'd submitted over the weekend. They wanted to schedule an interview for their newly created Chief Compliance Officer position. I stared at the message for a long moment, considering my options. I could stay at Ikaranova, rebuild what had been broken, and return to the status quo, albeit with more recognition of my value. Or I could start fresh somewhere that might appreciate compliance from the beginning rather than after a crisis. The company-wide email from Gregory arrived with a chime on my computer. Effective immediately. Rachel Voss is reinstated as Director of Compliance Management, reporting directly to me. All compliance-related matters should be directed to her attention. We recognize the critical importance of this function to our operations and regret any disruption caused by recent organizational changes. It was a public acknowledgement, but not an apology. And it said nothing about the personal impact of being called legacy clutter and demoted to a closet. I closed the email and opened my calendar, selecting a time slot for the Verdancy interview. I would keep my options open while fulfilling my responsibilities to Ekaranova. Professional to the end, that was also who I was. The next 2 weeks were a marathon of meetings, documentation, and inspections as I systematically restored our compliance authorizations. I rebuilt my team, training Lauren and 2 new hires in the fundamentals of regulatory compliance. I documented everything meticulously, creating systems that could survive even if I departed. Jared avoided me entirely. Having been reassigned to strategic projects with no direct reports, his office had indeed been relocated to a small space near the copy room. The Thompson project proceeded with the new contractor, though at significantly reduced margins. The restricted operational status was gradually lifted as we passed sequential reinspection. The $61 million subsidy remained in limbo, subject to a comprehensive review that would take at least 2 months. This particular delay was not entirely unintentional. On my part, I had emphasized certain concerns in my communications with the Department of Energy that had triggered their most thorough review protocol. My interview with Verdancy went exceptionally well. They offered me the position of Chief Compliance Officer with a 40% salary increase, a seat on their executive committee, and equity in the company. I told them I needed time to consider it. 3 weeks after the legacy clutter incident, Gregory called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, which immediately put me on alert. Rachel, first, I want to thank you for the remarkable job you've done restoring our compliance status. The board is extremely impressed with how quickly you've turned things around. Thank you. We still have work to do, but we're on the right track. He nodded, then slid a document across his desk toward me. The board has approved a retention package for you. It includes a substantial raise, bonus structure, and expanded responsibilities. I glanced at the figures. The salary matched Verdancy's offer. But there was something else that caught my attention. This includes an NDA and non-compete clause, I noted. Standard for executive positions, Gregory said smoothly. We're investing in you, Rachel. We need to protect that investment. I set the document down. And if I choose not to sign? He looked genuinely surprised. I thought you'd be pleased. This represents significant recognition of your value to Ekaranova. It does, I acknowledged. But it comes after I was publicly demoted, relocated to a storage closet, and called legacy clutter. I'm wondering why it took a compliance crisis for my value to be recognized. Gregory had the decency to look embarrassed. We made a mistake. We're trying to correct it. With strings attached, I pointed out. This non-compete would prevent me from working in my field for 2 years if I ever left Ikaranova. It's negotiable, he offered quickly. We can adjust the terms. I stood up, leaving the document on his desk. I'll need time to consider it. I have several options to evaluate. Options. Gregory frowned. You've received another offer. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. And unlike Ekaranova, they didn't need to see me save them from a crisis before valuing my expertise. I left his office feeling strangely light. For 10 years, I'd been the dutiful employee, working behind the scenes to make others successful. Now I was finally advocating for myself with the same determination I'd always brought to my work. That evening, I received a call from Thomas at the Department of Energy. Rachel, I wanted to give you a courtesy heads up. We've completed the preliminary review of Ekaranova's subsidy application, and there are some discrepancies we need to address before proceeding. What kind of discrepancies? I asked, though I had a good idea. The original application listed specific allocation requirements for workforce development and community investment. Our review indicates those allocations have been redirected to other areas without proper notification or approval. I closed my eyes. This was Jared's doing, reshuffling funds designated for training and community projects to boost short-term profit margins. I understand. What happens next? We'll be sending a formal inquiry requiring detailed documentation of all expenditures. Until that's resolved, the subsidy remains on administrative hold. After hanging up, I sat in my living room considering my next move. I could flag this issue to Gregory immediately, positioning myself as the savior once again. Or I could let Jared discover it himself when the inquiry arrived, further cementing his fall from grace. Neither option felt right. This wasn't about personal vindication anymore. It was about integrity, both mine and Ekaranova's. I drafted a detailed email to Gregory explaining the situation, the likely cause, and recommended steps for resolution. I didn't mention Jared by name, but the implication was clear enough. I scheduled it to send at 7 a.m. the next morning, giving me time to sleep on my decision. The next day unfolded with predictable drama. Gregory called an emergency meeting with finance, legal, and me. Jared was conspicuously absent. Why wasn't this caught earlier? Gregory demanded after I'd explained the subsidy issue. These fund reallocations would have required compliance review if proper protocols had been followed. I explained. But during the period when compliance was being streamlined, many decisions bypassed standard review procedures. Sandra from legal winced. This could be interpreted as misappropriation of designated funds. The repercussions could extend beyond just losing the subsidy. Gregory's face was grim. Fix it, whatever it takes. And Rachel. Thank you for bringing this to my attention promptly. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I'll work with finance to reconstruct the proper allocation pathways and prepare a remediation plan for the Department of Energy. Over the next few days, I methodically documented every instance where subsidy funds had been improperly redirected, creating a clear trail that led directly to decisions made by Jared. I didn't need to embellish or accuse, the facts spoke for themselves. When the formal inquiry arrived from the Department of Energy, we were prepared with a comprehensive response and remediation plan. It wouldn't restore the subsidy immediately, but it demonstrated good faith and a commitment to compliance. A week later, Jared was gone. The official announcement cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. His grand plans for operational efficiency had nearly crippled the company, and his financial maneuvering had put us at risk of regulatory penalties. His departure created a strange vacuum in the executive team. Though I'd won our battle, I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a renewed determination to build something better from the experience. Gregory invited me to lunch off-site, away from the corporate fishbowl. Over salads at an upscale restaurant with mountain views, he made his pitch. We're creating a new position, Chief Regulatory Officer, with oversight of compliance, government relations, and sustainability initiatives. The board unanimously agrees you're the right person for the role. I took a sip of water, considering that's a significant expansion of responsibilities. With compensation to match, he assured me, and a seat on the executive committee. No more decisions that affect your areas without your direct input. And the non-compete clause removed entirely. The new agreement focuses on positive incentives rather than restrictions. He slid a folder across the table. Take your time reviewing it. We want to get this right. I thanked him and promised to consider the offer carefully. That evening, I laid out both options side by side: Verdancy's Chief Compliance Officer role versus Ekarinova's new Chief Regulatory Officer position. Both offered similar compensation and influence. Both represented recognition of my expertise. The difference was history. At Verdancy, I would start fresh, without the shadow of past humiliations. At Ekarinova, I would carry both the scars and the victories of the past decade. In the end, my decision came down to impact. At Verdancy, I would build new systems from scratch. At Ekarinova, I could transform existing systems with the hard-won knowledge of what happened when they failed. 2 days later, I accepted Gregory's offer with one additional condition. I wanted a public announcement that explicitly acknowledged the critical role of compliance in our business model and outlined concrete steps to integrate it into our corporate culture. The announcement went out the following Monday. My new office was twice the size of my old one, with windows overlooking the mountains. My team expanded to include not just compliance specialists, but also sustainability experts and government relations professionals. Lauren became my deputy. Having discovered a genuine interest in the complex interplay of regulation and innovation, she had a natural talent for translating compliance requirements into language that engineers and business developers could understand and appreciate. The $61 million subsidy was eventually reinstated after 3 months of rigorous remediation and documentation. By then, we had implemented new allocation tracking systems that made future misappropriation virtually impossible. 6 months after being called legacy clutter, I sat in the executive committee meeting as we reviewed quarterly results. Our compliance costs had actually decreased by 12%, while our certification success rate had improved to 98%. The systems I'd built were working more efficiently than ever, now that they were properly resourced and respected. As the meeting concluded, Gregory asked me to present at the upcoming investor conference, a privilege previously reserved for sales and product development. The market is increasingly focused on regulatory compliance and sustainability, he explained. Your work isn't just a necessary cost center anymore, it's becoming a competitive advantage. Investors need to hear that story directly from you. I accepted, already outlining in my mind how I would translate our compliance journey into terms that would resonate with investors, not as bureaucratic necessity, but as strategic risk management and opportunity creation. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I noticed a small package on my desk that hadn't been there earlier. Inside was a sleek nameplate for my door that read, Rachel Voss, Chief Regulatory Officer. Underneath was a handwritten note from Gregory, no longer legacy, now legendary. I placed the nameplate on my desk, running my fingers over the engraved letters. Then I opened my drawer and pulled out a small note I'd written to myself the day after being called legacy clutter. It read simply, without me, it was never compliant. I smiled and tucked the note back into my drawer. I didn't need that reminder anymore. Everyone else had finally caught up to what I'd known all along. As I drove home that evening, the setting sun painted Colorado's mountains in hues of amber and gold. I thought about the journey of the past 6 months, from humiliation to vindication, from invisibility to influence. I hadn't just survived a corporate takedown attempt. I'd transformed it into an opportunity to rebuild something stronger, more resilient, and more valued. And I'd done it not through vengeful sabotage, but through methodical adherence to the systems and principles I'd always championed. Legacy wasn't a liability. It was the foundation that everything else was built upon. And now, finally, everyone understood that. My phone pinged with a message from Lauren. Just saw the investor conference agenda. Congratulations on the prime spot, P. As the regulatory review team from Nexus Solar just approved our joint venture proposal. They specifically mentioned our exemplary compliance framework as a deciding factor. I smiled and typed back, excellence in compliance isn't accidental. It's built one careful decision at a time. Just like careers, just like reputations, just like legacies that last.